Hello, I'm Darren Nonis. I'll be your host for this podcast episode on effective communication for learning. In the first episode, we learn what effective communication means in our Singapore classroom context. In this episode, we will hear about subject literacy, what it is, and why it has important implications for teaching and learning. With me today is Dr. Alison Tan, a lead specialist at the English Language Institute of Singapore. Hello, Dr. Tan.
Hi, Darren.
Dr. Tan, you co-designed and co-facilitated the core curriculum for the whole school approach to effective communication in English initiative. Dr. Tan, I understand that one of the key ideas of the course is subject literacy. Could you tell us what subject literacy is?
Yes. At ELIS, we define subject literacy as the ability to use academic language appropriately, meaningfully, and precisely in a subject area. We recognize that every subject uses language in ways that are specialized and unique to that subject. The vocabulary, grammar, and discourse features of a subject's language are not only different from everyday language, they can be quite different across subjects. And students need to be proficient in both subject knowledge and the language of a subject to do well in it.
That's interesting. For us to better understand subject literacy, could you give us some examples of how language varies across subjects, particularly English medium subjects?
Yes, while they are all classified as English medium subjects, English is used quite differently in each subject. Even the meaning of the same words can vary from subject to subject and from their everyday use. Take the words prime and table, for example. You can imagine the confusion when a young student first encounters these words in a mathematics classroom. They suddenly have nothing to do with importance nor furniture that a child would be familiar with. And their meaning in mathematics can be a lot more cognitively challenging too. The school curriculum has many such polysemous terms, that is, words that have more than one meaning. Another example would be the word base. The same word may be used in mathematics, science, and history, but it means different things in different subjects. I'm sure you can think of a few polysemous terms, Darren.
Yes, I'm thinking about the word root.
Yes, that's right. In science, students might encounter aerial roots. In mathematics, square root. And in the humanities subjects, root cause.
What about figure and volume?
You see, once you reflect on this, it's clear that there are many examples. And we're talking now about just content vocabulary, words that express core concepts in their subjects. What about all the other words the student would need to master the concepts and to communicate their understanding of them, whether in speech or writing? And what about the ways in which those words must be organized or expressed in subject-specific contexts?
I have not really thought about that. Could you give us an example?
How about an example in science? A student may have learned about the water cycle and become familiar with content vocabulary like evaporate, water vapor, and condensation. The student might even understand where rain comes from or why water droplets appear on an apple taken out of the fridge. However, consider when a teacher asks a student to explain a process within a particular context, such as why hot cupcakes became soggy after they were placed in a sealed plastic container. The student might be lost for words and be unable to explain the phenomenon accurately. For example, instead of explaining how water vapor in the container gained heat from the hot cupcakes and condensed to form water droplets on the cool surface of the box, the student might say, the heat from the cupcakes caused the container to be moist, hence making the cake soggy.
I can see how the child might write that from a layman's perspective. And I can see how that answer is going to be problematic in a science classroom. It doesn't show that the student understands the concepts of evaporation and condensation, does it?
That's right. And the student has used the word moist, which is non-specific and not a good substitute for water droplets. Think about what the student would need to know and be able to do in order to write an answer that would be appropriate in a science classroom. He would need to apply his knowledge of the concepts in different contexts and be able to use words precisely to explain scientific processes accurately. He would need to know and be able to use the words and sentence structures that would enable him to explain the relevant cause and effect relationships. He would also need to know that in the context of the task, he is expected to demonstrate sound understanding of the concepts. In other words, his answer must be at once relevant, accurate, and complete.
That's quite a tall order, Dr. Tan. The student must be able to know science and to talk and write science English as well, so to speak.
Exactly. How can students learn to think and talk science? Surely the science classroom must support his learning of both the concepts and language of science. We can't expect students to catch subject language by chance or through exposure to science language alone.
How then might teachers help students learn subject language?
In addition to teaching content, as a subject teacher, you need to think about teaching the language of a subject deliberately. You need to think about the unique ways that English is used in your subject, then teach it explicitly. As you would provide scaffolding to help your students learn the concepts in your subject, you should also provide scaffolding to help them with the subject language. It is helpful if you can consider possible areas of confusion for your students. You are teaching subject-specific ways of knowing, thinking, and communicating.
Dr. Tan, across the school curriculum, or even within a school day, students need to deal with several subjects. That means, I suppose, that they need to learn the language of each subject.
Yes, that's right. I remember an art teacher telling me about how her students always looked quite puzzled when she talked about composition. When she learned about subject literacy, she realized the students were thinking about writing compositions in their EL classrooms. Recognizing that learning gap was an essential first step in helping her plug that gap. She went on to explicitly teach what the word composition means in art. Moreover, she went on a hunt for examples of language use that are unique to art. Now, she designs her lessons to provide support for her students to learn the language of art.
That's interesting. Can you tell us more?
Well, besides the explicit teaching of taken for granted terms like background, outline, and balance, she also undertook an inquiry into helping her students talk about art. She noticed that students could only provide limited responses when asked to talk about an artwork, even the articulate ones. When she consulted me as a knowledgeable other, we worked to unpack the language that students would need to talk about art. We realized that the words and comments she would like to hear from the students were related to the elements of art and principles of design. Students would need to learn about concepts like shapes, lines, space, repetition, rhythm, contrast, emphasis, scale, and proportion. They would also need to learn the words that they can use to talk about these concepts.
Are we talking about words like square, round, triangular?
Those certainly, but also words like organic, irregular, heavy, light, and free, just to name a few. And as for words that describe their effects, students can use excitement, mystery, balance, danger, or even growth.
The words themselves seem common enough, but unless I was explicitly taught their meanings and how to use them in this context, I don't think I would be able to talk about art like that.
That's the challenge of subject literacy, Darren. And you would need more than explicit instruction. You would need a lot more scaffolding and practice to be able to become more fluent in art talk.
So, in a nutshell, what is your message to our listeners who are subject teachers?
Don't forget to teach the language of your subject. It is unique, specialized, and above all, remember, it is nobody's first language.
That's a good way of putting it. Thank you, Dr. Tan, for your insights on subject literacy.
Thank you for having me.
You've just listened to an episode of the Effective Communication for Learning podcast series from the English Language Institute of Singapore. To find out more about the ELIS podcast, visit go.gov.sg/ELIS podcast. Thank you for listening.